Ever since fluoride has been added to drinking water in 1945, it's been controversial. What's the latest on fluoridation? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Fluoride in water is complicated. Responsible researchers have different perspectives. Today is the first of a two-part series. Our first guest is Dr. Gary Slade, a dentist and epidemiologist.
My perspective is that the benefits in preventing decay are clear and abundant, and that it's a good thing for children to have fluoridated water, to be using fluoridated toothpaste in the right amounts.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, examining the pros and cons of water fluoridation.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, the Food and Drug Administration has just approved a new painkiller. It's the first non-opioid analgesic to be developed in decades. Suzetrigine will be sold under the brand name Jornavix. Some researchers have described it as roughly comparable to a weak opioid. The FDA approved the drug for acute pain, such as that following surgery or an injury. Because the medication works on sodium channels in peripheral nerves, experts hope there will be little or no addiction potential. The two clinical trials that led to approval of Jornavix compared it to placebo or the ingredients in Vicodin, hydrocodone and acetaminophen. It was comparable to the opioid combination for relieving pain following a tummy tuck or bunion removal procedure. The cost is not trivial. At roughly $31 a day, it's substantially more expensive than traditional post-surgical pain medicines. Side effects may include itching, rash, muscle spasms, and elevated creatine phosphokinase. Patients should avoid grapefruit when taking Jornavix.
When people, especially elite athletes, exercise vigorously, they may damage muscle tissue. That can lead to pain and loss of strength in the affected muscles. It can take time for the inflammation to ease and for the muscles to recover. A systematic review has found that athletes taking curcumin, the active ingredient in turmeric, recovered more quickly. Investigators included studies that featured either pre- or post-exercise curcumin consumption. Studies demonstrated better muscle recovery compared to placebo among people taking 1 to 4 grams of curcumin after exercise. The researchers conclude that curcumin demonstrates a significant potential to relieve muscle-related symptoms. It also appears to have the capability to lower biomarkers associated with inflammation and boost antioxidant levels.
A Japanese study presented recently at the International Stroke Conference suggests a surprising connection between the composition of the oral and gut microbiota and the risk of stroke. The scientists had previously discovered a link between the presence of Streptococcus mutans in the mouth and the risk of bleeding in the brain. These bacteria are responsible for tooth decay, but they're not the only ones. According to the investigators, the presence of Streptococcus aeruginosus, another type of bacteria in either the saliva or the gut, was associated with a 20% higher risk of stroke. 2 years of follow-up revealed that stroke survivors who harbored S. aeruginosus were at significantly greater risk for major cardiovascular events or death. This study included 189 people who'd had strokes and 55 who had not. The scientists hope to expand the study to look prospectively at the possible risk of oral dysbiosis on stroke.
British researchers are reporting that oral health appears to be associated with a lower risk of dementia. They analyzed bacteria living in the mouths of 115 older individuals. 55 of the participants were experiencing mild cognitive impairment, or MCI. Those with Neisseria bacteria in their mouths had better visual attention and executive function despite MCI. These bacteria were associated with better working memory among volunteers without cognitive difficulties. If Porphyromonas bacteria were present, people were much more likely to be having cognitive difficulties.
Another study suggests that flossing may be good for your brain. Researchers analyzed data from 6,200 older people. About 65% of the volunteers were in the habit of flossing on a regular basis. During 25 years of follow-up, just over 400 of them experienced a stroke. Habitual flossers were 22% less likely to have an ischemic stroke and 44% less likely to have a cardioembolic stroke. They were also less likely to have developed atrial fibrillation. Even those who flossed once a week got some protection, but the more often people flossed, the less likely they were to have a stroke. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Fluoride in municipal water systems has been controversial for decades. The goal of adding fluoride to water is to reduce tooth decay.
How well does it work? And are there any downsides? Because this is a complex topic, we're bringing you a two-part series with researchers on both sides of the issue.
To learn more about the benefits of fluoride, we turn now to Dr. Gary Slade. He is the John W. Stamm Distinguished Professor of Dentistry at the University of North Carolina Adams School of Dentistry in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Dr. Slade conducts epidemiological studies of oral diseases, including public health interventions for prevention of dental decay.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Gary Slade.
Thank you, Terry. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a beautiful sunny day. I've enjoyed the trip so far.
Dr. Slade, let's just start at the very beginning. You are a dentist. You are
Yes.
also an epidemiologist, which means you study, how stuff affects populations.
Disease, particularly.
What's fluoride?
Well, it's an abundant element in the earth. We like it in dentistry because it has a particular attraction to teeth, to the enamel onto teeth, and it makes them stronger.
How does it do that?
Two main ways, just acting superficially on the surface of the enamel. It gets absorbed first into the film that's coating the teeth most of the time, and then it gets built into the crystals of the teeth. And the neat thing is, when those crystals have been initially attacked with acid, which happens pretty much any time you eat sugar, that fluoride is very attracted to that acid-affected enamel. And so it gets soaked in and actually strengthens the tooth on its surface. So that's the big one.
And what's the little one?
The little one is when you swallow fluoride as a young person, when your teeth are forming, they still haven't even erupted. So you're a little tyke. And that fluoride gets incorporated into those crystals while the tooth is growing.
We've also heard that it has some antimicrobial activity. Is there anything to that?
Yes, certainly at higher concentrations. And the way I've described this, certainly the swallowed version of fluoride is what you would want to do if you were drinking it in water. But the fluoride that we use clinically in dentistry has a much higher concentration. And yes, that'll knock back those bacteria that are stuck in that film on the teeth.
Now, when I was a kid, and that was a very, very long time ago, I went to our dentist, Willie. He was a family friend, lovely man. And he had one piece of advice. Don't eat sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Candy is bad for your teeth, Joey.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, how well did you follow that advice?
Kids, I followed it reasonably well. And I did have some cavities, but very few. If you were to compare sugar consumption cut back? Follow Willie's advice as the dentist, like no sugary beverages, no soft drinks, maybe not so much juice, maybe not so much candy. How would that compare to fluoride in reducing cavities?
In laboratories with animals where you can control everything, that works brilliantly. And those rats benefit enormously from that. In human beings, especially free-living people like us, it's hard to get that degree of, let me say, adherence to such a restricted regime, and perhaps no more so than nowadays. It's probably tougher than when you were a kid, Joe.
Probably. Have there been, Dr. Slade, randomized controlled trials of fluoride from, the perspective that you would want to take in terms of protecting teeth or looking at risks?
Absolutely, for fluoride in toothpaste, which is the massive amount of market share at the moment in the United States and other countries, is fluoridated toothpaste. There's been a trove of randomized controlled trials, the best evidence possible for healthcare decisions. Likewise, that fluoride varnish that I mentioned, that is very high concentration that a dentist will paint on teeth. The big Achilles heel in the evidence base, until very recently, is that there's never been a randomized controlled trial of fluoride in drinking water for prevention of tooth decay.
What are the benefits and risks of fluoride? So as both a dentist and an epidemiologist, it's controversial. There have been a couple of studies published in the JAMA Pediatrics, presumably high-quality journal, peer-reviewed, suggesting that there may be an impact on IQ in kids. And the Cochrane review, which is, as you know, as an epidemiologist, is considered a very high-level review of evidence, has suggested that while fluoride was really good at reducing cavities up until about the mid-70s, since then, maybe not quite as impressive. So give us a sense, like if a child were to start using a fluoride-based toothpaste every day and drinking water that was fluoridated, how many cavities would be prevented? How many teeth would be protected?
Well, I'll start with that final comment. In the United States now, you'd be looking at, let's say in their first school years of life, you'd be looking at preventing 1.5 or 2 teeth from getting decay in the primary teeth, the baby teeth. In the permanent teeth, it'd be more like 0.5 to 1 tooth per person.
I hate to say it, but that doesn't sound great. I mean, I'm thinking, wow, if, fluoridated water, that should save a dozen teeth. I mean, there should be no cavities anywhere.
Wouldn't it be nice if it was that silver bullet or what other things we grasp for? But it, as in most things with health, it's not that simple. Back to, though, yes, this count. I mean, what is half a tooth, really? So I've often advocated that we need to think of an intervention, and especially if we wanted to go to fluoridated water, that's not done individually. It's done for communities, entire cities. So we need to think of what is the population benefit. And there you are talking millions of cavities prevented by virtue of community water fluoridation.
Because half a tooth per person, if you have enough people, protects presumably a lot of teeth.
Oh boy, yes.
Now, I have a question for you. Not every country fluoridates its water. As an epidemiologist, have you looked at the differences amongst these countries?
Personally, I have not studied that rigorously, but lots of people have, let me say, delved into it. And different people looking at purportedly the same data sets come up with different answers. Some people say, oh, well, clearly it's not having an effect. And others saying, well, yes, if you examine it carefully, there is a beneficial effect of fluoride in drinking water.
Well, I'm just curious. There must be some studies. For Japan, for example, I don't think they fluoridate their water. Or some of the countries in Europe, for example, France may not be doing that very much. I mean, do we have any sense at all about the benefits, where one country or one county in one country or like in Canada where one province, do we have any of that comparative data? And roughly speaking, what would we glean from that kind of research?
Well, I think the reason that people get different answers when they look at different countries is because guess what? Those countries have very different rigor in their collection of statistics, which is what this requires to answer that question. So the better way to start answering the question is where you're alluding to here, Joe, which is, well, let's at least confine it to one country. And I'll jump in here with the work that I have done recently. And
we want to hear about it.
So we studied children and adolescents living in all over the United States to examine their rate of dental decay. This was based on 10 years of data from about 1999 to 2014. And we found that children living in counties where fluoridation was relatively widespread had a lower rate of decay than children living in counties where there was less fluoridation. And again, because we had a rigorous data set and consistent methodology, we were able to tease apart some more parts of that story to see, well, what effect is there with, say, dental visits? Is that partly accounting for this? Is it perhaps just demographics that are doing this? So I think, going back to your point, Joe, why is there not a shouting difference when people perhaps compare Japan with another country, is so often in epidemiology, the shouting difference is the biased difference. And the only way to reduce that bias is to get a more rigorously controlled trial.
You're listening to Dr. Gary Slade. He is the John W. Stamm Distinguished Professor of Dentistry at the UNC Adams School of Dentistry in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Dr. Slade conducts epidemiological studies of oral diseases, including public health interventions for prevention of dental decay.
After the break, Dr. Slade will share his perspective on the benefits of fluoride for families.
We'll also hear about the randomized controlled trial he and colleagues are conducting in rural Lenoir County, North Carolina. How well does fluoridated water protect against tooth decay?
Can we get too much fluoride? If so, what are the consequences?
How much toothpaste do you put on your brush? How much do you need?
We'll also discuss the effect of diet on tooth health, as well as the use of mercury amalgam fillings.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
This People's Pharmacy podcast is made possible in part by Native Path, maker of a superlative collagen supplement. Native Path uses only type 1 and type 3 collagen fibers in their product.
These are the two most important kinds of collagen found in our cartilage, bones, hair, skin, nails, and throughout the body. You can learn more at getnativepath.com.
Native Path contains only collagen, no fillers or additives or artificial sweeteners. It's independently tested for assurance that it's free of heavy metals.
You can put Native Path collagen powder in anything, smoothies, soups, or even coffee. That makes it easy, and the formula is easily absorbed so it can get right to work in your body.
Native Path has some amazing bundle deals with great discounts for 3 and 6 packs. They have more than 8,000 five-star reviews. And, this is important, a 365-day no-risk guarantee.
Visit getnativepath.com, get.nativepath.com/PPOD and start your transformation today.
Once again, that's GETNATIVEPATH.com/PPOD.
That's getnativepath.com/PPOD. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by CocoVia dietary supplements. CocoVia Memory Plus is formulated with 750 milligrams of cocoflavanols, a level clinically proven to improve 3 different types of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Our show today is the first of a 2-part series on the pros and cons of fluoride. Not all public health interventions are controversial, but fluoridation has been contentious for years and is gaining attention in the current climate. We start by learning more about the potential benefits of fluoridation.
That's why we're talking with Dr. Gary Slade. He is the John W. Stam Distinguished Professor of Dentistry at the UNC Adams School of Dentistry in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He conducts epidemiological studies of oral diseases, including public health interventions for preventing dental decay.
So, Dr. Slade, there are a lot of parents who are confused because they read the headlines. There's an article about IQ. They don't know what to make of it. Should they be using fluoride in the toothpaste? Should they have fluoride in the water? Should they have a water filter? What's your overall perspective on the benefits of fluoride for families?
My perspective is that the benefits in preventing decay are clear and abundant, and that it's a good thing for children to have fluoridated water, to be using fluoridated toothpaste in the right amounts. I think it's important recognising the controversies that we're most recently seeing with IQ, and there have been others before that. I want to remain vigilant. I believe all reputable researchers want to remain vigilant and continue to really chase down what is happening with this new evidence. And even the authors of some of those initial papers questioning, is there an adverse effect on IQ? I think they are looking on and saying, well, we still need more evidence. The question isn't answered yet.
Dr. Slade, I hope you'll tell us about the research that you're doing now. You say in Lenoir County?
Certainly, Lenoir County, North Carolina, the eastern part of the states. We are doing the world's first randomized controlled trial of fluoride in drinking water for prevention of tooth decay in young children. The twist here is that the drinking water is in 5-gallon bottles.
Oh.
It's not the town's water supply.
I was wondering how you could randomize fluoride in a place, and that's what you're doing. You're saying, don't drink the tap water, drink this water out of the big water bottle.
Correct, and that's that mindset that it wasn't possible to do a randomized control trial, because how can you randomize public water systems? Mm-hmm. Historically, that was the only way we conceived of providing fluoride in drinking water. But nowadays, massive numbers of families and children are consuming bottled water. I mean, we've got nearly 20% of US children do not drink tap water, period. There's very large percents who much prefer to drink bottled water. So we're using bottled water not only because it allows us methodologically to randomize and mask or blind, as some people call it, people as to the intervention. We're using bottled water because they're pragmatic. That's what people want, and that's what people consume.
How many families are participating in your study?
We've randomized 200, which is our target size, and they were aged 2 to 6 months at the time of randomization. We deliver bottled water, either fluoridated or non-fluoridated to them until the child reaches their 4th birthday. And at that time, we examine their teeth and determine if there's a difference in decay rates between the two groups.
Dr. Slade, fluoride is everywhere. It's in our toothpaste. It's in our mouthwash.
Yes,
in our
it's
tea.
in our tea. Yes,
It's
it
in
is.
our water. And I guess the question becomes one of, can we get too much fluoride?
Oh, yeah.
And if so, what are the consequences?
Yes, you can get too much, and especially if it's happening early in your life. The first sign is it's going to be mottling your teeth is the word that used to be used. It's a yellowish, brownish, or even darker staining of the teeth. It's now known to be dental fluorosis.
That doesn't sound good.
It's not good. It looks bad, and interestingly, though, the teeth are much tougher, and those fluorosed teeth are much more resistant to tooth decay than regular teeth, which is sort of how they first discovered fluoride in drinking water was beneficial. So that's the first initial sign. Now, to what extent is that simply the bellwether? Is that the tip of the iceberg? What else is happening with these excessive amounts of fluoride intake? Over the decades, there have been all sorts of concerns, and rightly so, and really rigorous studies on topics ranging from hypothyroidism, bone cancer. Some of them have been really offbeat, false accusations, Down syndrome, and things that clearly is there's no plausibility. But of course, the big one at the moment is concern, and it's well-placed concern that requires well-cared for, rigorous, ongoing research. Is it affecting children's IQ? Certainly, it seems at high concentrations, more than twice what we use in the United States. They're seeing in places like China and so forth, they are finding this relationship at very high concentrations. But what's happening here with concentrations of about 0.7 milligrams per litre, which is what Durham water supply uses, for example, what that means for there is a very big question mark right now. And that's why we have to be vigilant and do that more research. And yes, your answer will probably come, Terry, in years, not weeks.
So here's a question about amounts. If you watch the commercials on TV, you see parents, just smearing on the toothpaste so that it completely covers the toothbrush for a little kid. And I'm just curious as to whether or not a child can really, dare I say it, spit out all that toothpaste.
And they cannot, and that's why it's bad, and that those ads are doing the wrong thing totally. The American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry recommends a smear of toothpaste, not even a pea size, when children first start in their infancy, when their teeth first come through. By the age of 4 or 5 years, they're progressing up to something beyond a pea size part. In the United States, we don't have half concentration fluoride toothpastes. Other countries do.
Which are presumably marketed then for children.
Exactly. And there is therefore that greater, I think, safety, because even a well-intentioned parent who tries to do a smear, things can go wrong, and heck,
easily
that child might think this is nice stuff and give themselves 3 extra smears.
It's pretty tasty stuff.
Pretty tasty. Yeah. So, but we do not have that in the United States.
That seems like a shame. Joe, you've got a question.
Well, I'm curious about the benefits of fluoride for older people. Nobody here, of course. Yeah, well, we embrace our age. The point I guess I'm making is, so fluoride can make a difference for children, and that's what you have been studying for years. But what about when somebody gets to be 60 or 70 or 80? Is there still a benefit?
We studied that very question in the Australian population and found, yes, there is that benefit. And that how can that be? Their teeth have erupted, but that goes back to the big two ways that fluoride is beneficial. This is fluoride in drinking water is beneficial. Is the bigger one is that fluoride in the mouth, swirling around, getting into saliva. It's a constant sort of drip, drip, drip of a strengthening agent for when teeth do get attacked. And so, yes, benefits are seen in adults. That was our study found that some decade or two ago, and that's not the only one.
Dr. Slade, I expect that you have recommendations that you offer the parents of children on diet. What would they be?
One of them is to drink water.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that the more water that's drunk, the less sugar-sweetened beverages that are drunk.
Mm-hmm.
A sound recommendation is to restrict the number of times per day, emphasis on number of times rather than amount, to restrict the number of times per day that children are having candy and those sweets that you had as a kid, Joe. The idea being that if you're going to have a sugar attack, better to get it over and done with in one hit. But in general, restricting the amount of sugar, both in frequency and in amount, is also good for children's health and people's health for so many other reasons anyways.
Ultra-processed food is something that we often talk about and say we should be avoiding it. Does it have an impact on teeth?
We don't know that.
Uh-huh.
I think there's a lot of speculation and people are scurrying around saying, how can we investigate that?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly there's no epidemiologic evidence that I would give credence to, at least.
I'd like to go to basics, if I might, Dr. Slade. You all talk about caries. We all talk about cavities.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing.
Is there a difference?
Caries is a process, a bit like rust.
Oh,
Rust
okay.
can be both a noun and a verb. So caries is the process. The cavity is the resulting deficit, the divot in the tooth.
What is it? And how does it happen?
Well, the sugar in the mouth gets used by bacteria that are in the film coating the teeth. And those bacteria produce acid, and it's sitting right next to the tooth. That acid dissolves calcium, phosphate, hydroxyl components of the crystals that make the enamel surface of the tooth. And so rust is a sort of an example. It mightn't see it at first, and a few bits mightn't worry you that much, but the day you walk out and the fender falls off your car, then you realize you've got a real problem.
You haven't been paying attention. Yeah.
So walk me through this. So you've got acid, you've got sugar, you've got bacteria.
You have acid because you have sugar.
Right.
You got it.
But now what happens? How do we end up with a cavity, and what exactly is a cavity?
Well, imagine that acid leaching away at a crystalline structure. I don't know, think of other crystals that you can etch, that you drop acid onto it and it suddenly, you've got this porosity being developed and these little divots in the tooth, and that creates more room for more acid to build up. So it literally dissolves away, if you like, or rusts away that very strong surface.
And then what?
Isn't that means that there's nothing. The white surface of the tooth has now got a defect. It's going to fill with more food, and that's going to become a real big hole that hurts. It's going to keep going towards the center of the earth, towards the center of the tooth, and that's where it gets to the nerve in the tooth. That becomes.
Then you have a toothache.
Then you have a toothache. You end up having a root canal if you're got the money and you can get it attended to, or you get an abscess and you've got a throbbing side of your face and any number of problems.
And then what does the dentist do?
These days, if it's gotten to an abscess and a throbbing ache, that tooth can probably be saved. A root canal, great fun. build it up and make a very elaborate crown. And sometimes these days they might say, well, let's cut to the chase, remove that and put an implant in its place. But we're talking, this is like now your fender's fallen off your car. We're now restoring the whole vehicle from sort of the wheel nuts up.
So when
That's a wonderful
Yeah.
analogy.
I'm sorry, but
so when I was a kid, the dentist, Willie, would fill my cavities
Yeah.
with amalgam.
Yep.
Mercury. In fact, he would put it in his palm of his hand and roll it around and then stuff it in. And in fact, the drill that he would use to get rid of the decay
oh yeah,
made my whole body shake.
oh yeah. And it was painful to be drilled.
It was
because did you have a
it
jab?
was.
Did you have a shot?
No,
No.
Willie did not have jabs.
no local anesthetic.
Join the club.
So you know what I'm talking
I
about.
know.
Today, of course, we have high-speed drills. We have local anesthetics. People don't even feel a thing. But what's your perspective on amalgam? Because it's been very complicated for decades. And the American Dental Association says, don't worry, be happy, everything's fine. But relatively few dentists these days are using amalgam.
Right. The reason amalgam is being phased out is firstly, well, in no particular order, environmental, that mercury that your dentist should not have been rubbing
Right.
in his hand, that even if that was managed differently, it's going to have to be disposed of somehow. Not good for the environment. Secondly, people prefer the appearance of white-coloured or seemingly natural-coloured materials, and those have got to a stage where they're pretty good. But interestingly, is this being done because of a health hazard, because the mercury in my teeth and in your teeth, is that affecting your health? Well, there have been two very good randomised control trials to look at that question, and they were convincing enough rigorous trials that they were able to say, no, there is no effect on children's IQ or other behavioural measures on children. And not only was there no effect in the study, there was a very high probability that there was no effect, period. It was a well-designed study from that perspective. So we've got, I won't say it's an irony, but paradoxically perhaps we have very good evidence that mercury in amalgam is not harmful for your health, Joe, or mine. But dentists and patients are walking away from it for other reasons, and I think that's very reasonable.
Is there any concern about the composites that are being used instead of amalgam?
Sure. These have various properties that might affect metabolism, might affect hormone production. There's a host of worries and potential concerns. Have there been any good observational studies to say, are they truly affecting human health? The court is definitely out on that still. But that would be another area I think vigilance is needed. I think we need rigorous studies of that.
You're listening to Dr. Gary Slade. He is the John W. Stamm Distinguished Professor of Dentistry at the University of North Carolina Adams School of Dentistry in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He conducts epidemiological studies of oral diseases, including public health interventions for prevention of dental decay.
It's time for a short break. Then when we come back, we'll learn why people should think more about their teeth and take better care of them.
What are the top 3 things we can do for better dental health?
You may think of dental health as just restricted to your mouth, but it can affect your whole body.
As we've mentioned, the topic of fluoridation is controversial.
We'll also hear a bit from next week's guest on why he is concerned about fluoridation.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
This podcast is made possible in part by CocoVia, backed by 20 years of scientific research and the maker of the most proven and concentrated flavanol extract in the market today, Coco Pro Cocoa Extract. Cocoa flavanols are among the most studied plant-based bioactives today and are clinically proven to promote cardiovascular and brain health for the long term, supporting a strong heart and better memory.
Get 15% off your order of any CocoVia product by using the discount code PPOD15. Learn more at CocoVia, and remember that discount code is PPOD15.
These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by CocoVia dietary supplements, cocoflavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health, made with a proven concentrated flavanol extract. More information at cocovia.com.
Today is the first of a two-part series on the pros and cons of water fluoridation. Our first guest is a dentist who has studied numerous ways to prevent dental decay, including water fluoridation. He's enthusiastic about the benefits. Next week, we'll get a different perspective.
We're talking with Dr. Gary Slade, the John W. Stamm Distinguished Professor of Dentistry at the University of North Carolina Adams School of Dentistry, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He conducts epidemiological studies of oral diseases, including public health interventions for preventing tooth decay.
So in wrapping up, people need to think more about their teeth. I mean, I remember one dentist who had a big poster in his waiting room, only floss the teeth you want.
You don't have to floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep.
How important is flossing?
Look, it's useful to help the health of your gums. It really isn't, for various reasons, doing much to prevent tooth decay. It makes your mouth feel clean and fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all good things. There's other things. If you've got 16 things on your list, it's not at the top of the list for your dental prevention.
Okay, what are the top three?
What are the top things on the list?
And why is dental health so important?
Okay, so the top three, this is me, subjective. I may be Dr. Slade, but this is plenty of my colleagues will come up with the different three. And it doesn't matter if it's first, second, or third, but certainly a healthy diet. Second, good just daily dental hygiene, brushing your teeth with a fluoridated toothpaste. Do that a couple of times a day. And third, I believe you need to have part of a healthy diet is to have fluoride in drinking water, because that's giving you the extra benefit of preventing cavities.
We think of dental health as something that's in your mouth, preventing tooth decay. But there is growing evidence that your mouth and the health of your mouth affects the whole body. Perhaps your brain, in the case of periodontitis, or even your heart. Mm-hmm. So help us better understand why dental health is crucial for our whole health.
That evidence about maybe bad teeth are giving you other serious health conditions, that evidence, some of that is stronger than others, some of that the court is still out. That's my view. So I don't want people to rush off and say they're brushing their teeth to ward off this, that, or the other, because I don't think we've got strong enough evidence to look people in the eye and say, you'll achieve this. I think good dental health is important because dental cavities hurt. People don't like dental pain, and nor should they. It's dangerous for them. Certainly when cavities and gum disease spread and the teeth get loose and wonky, you've got infections in your mouth, whether it's spreading or not. I don't want to have an infection in my toenail or my mouth. Thank you. Of course, people value enormously having healthy, attractive teeth. So our population is voting with its feet in seeking to have very pretty straight teeth. So I don't think I need to convince people on that argument. I do want to convince people on the benefits of just sensible diet, hygiene, and using fluoridated water. That's good to stop that disease process. You already want to stop that anyway because you want to have pretty teeth, or at least not snarly old rotten teeth. But I want people to realize this is a disease, and left unchecked, it's going to cause some serious harm.
Dr. Gary Slade, thanks so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Dr. Gary Slade, the John W. Stamm Distinguished Professor of Dentistry at the University of North Carolina Adams School of Dentistry in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He conducts epidemiological studies of oral diseases, including public health interventions for prevention of dental decay.
Water fluoridation is a controversial topic, and researchers have legitimate differences of opinion on it. Next week, we'll be talking with a scientist concerned about the hazards of fluoridation, especially for children. We thought you might want to hear a preview from him today.
We turn now to Dr. Bruce Lanphier. He is Professor of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, British Columbia. He's studied the effects of lead exposure on children's health for decades. More recently, he's published research on the effects of early fluoride exposure on children's IQ. He'll describe that work next week on the People's Pharmacy.
Dr. Lanphier, we've been talking about fluoridated water to prevent cavities in our teeth. What are the other sources of fluoride that people might encounter?
So when we talk about the sources of fluoride, you're exactly right to target fluoride added to drinking water because that is the major source. Probably somewhere between 40 to 70% of people's intake is from water. And if you're in a fluoridated community, it may be as high as 75%. So that is the major source. And when we compare it or contrast it with something like lead poisoning, which is found everywhere, including housing, that's actually quite appealing because you could take fluoride out of the water just like that and get rid of the major source. So that's important. There are a host of other possible sources, including pesticides, particularly those used on grapes. So for children, for example, who eat a lot of raisins, that might be a concern. It can be used in anesthetics, in certain antidepressants. So it really can be found everywhere, but probably the most important is fluoride added to drinking water, other drinks and foods made with fluoridated drinking water. And we're especially concerned about formula-fed infants because infants will absorb fluoride more readily than older children and adults. And infants who are formula-fed, that's their primary source of nutrition. And if their formula is mixed with fluoridated tap water, they can have levels 3 to 4 times higher than adults drinking the same water, and up to 70 times higher than children who are breastfed, because breast milk contains very, very small amounts of fluoride.
So, Dr. Lanphier, let me just get this straight. We are exposed to fluoride through our water and presumably through toothpaste and mouthwash and what the dentists do. But you went on to say pharmaceuticals, and you went on to say anesthetics, and you went on to say also pesticides. So it sounds like there are fluoride atoms every place in our environment. I mean, drugs like Prozac, fluoxetine, or Lipitor, atorvastatin, or Flonase, fluticasone, or levofloxacin, Levaquin, and you also mentioned anesthetics. So it sounds like we are exposed to fluoride in a lot of different ways on a regular basis.
That's right. And that may be part of the reason that fluorosis, discoloration or mottling of the teeth, has been increasing over the past 20 or 30 years. And that led to the U.S. Public Health Service uh, lowering the recommended amount of fluoride added to drinking water. So we are probably getting much more fluoride than we were 50, 60 years ago.
I think a lot of people have no idea that they're being exposed to fluoride from all of these different sources. They probably heard about Teflon and PFAS, which you'll have to help us understand what a PFAS is, because there are thousands of chemicals in our environment that are PFASs.
Yes. Yeah, and they're in particular in our drinking water, which is kind of ironic because that's what we're concerned about with fluoride. Now, we don't know that some of these interact or not, but one of our biggest concerns in environmental health these days is how the chemical cocktails or the chemical mixtures we're all exposed to interact with each other. So, for example, we've been looking at fluoride, but we found that boys whose mother had low iodine in their diet actually did worse than the boys who had higher exposure to fluoride but sufficient iodine. Now, that would suggest that one possible mechanism about how fluoride results in IQ deficits is that it might do by disrupting the thyroid hormone. Fluoride and iodine compete for absorption into the thyroid gland. We also know that PFAS disrupts thyroid hormones. And so if you're exposed to PFAS chemicals, higher amounts because we're all exposed, but if you're exposed to higher amounts of PFAS chemicals and you're iodine deficient or pregnant, or you have Hashimoto's antibodies, that also puts you at risk for hypothyroidism. In our MyREX study, we did a study, and there's only 2 studies out there like this, so more clearly needs to be done. In our MyREX study, we looked at fluoride in drinking water in the pregnant women, and we found that as fluoride levels increased, we saw significant increases in hypothyroidism in the moms. When we looked at the women and stratified whether they had Hashimoto's antibodies or not, we found almost threefold increased risk in hypothyroidism. And then when we looked to see whether it made a difference if the women had lived in the same house, drinking the same amounts of fluoride in their drinking water, the results increased yet again. So one of the most important potential mechanisms is thyroid disruption. That not only might cause hypothyroidism, we need more evidence there, but also might help to explain why children do poorly when they're exposed to fluoride. The developing fetus is entirely dependent upon the mom's thyroid hormones in the first 1 or 2 trimesters.
Dr. Lanfear, you have been describing some of the problems associated with fluoride exposure, especially in newborns, but maybe even in women with regard to thyroid function. And I think that a lot of the fluoride enthusiasts and a lot of dentists who love fluoride will say, but the levels are so low, Dr. Lanfear, they couldn't possibly cause any problems. Not in children, not in the fetus, and certainly not in the mom. Can you help us better understand this whole idea of the so-called dose response curve when it comes to toxicology and the possibility that even low levels over a lifetime might pose problems?
Yes, there's a few ways to think about it. I think one of the most important ways is to recognize that this idea that low levels of chemicals are safe or innocuous really it's an assumption. About 50 or 60 years ago, that assumption was made so as not to upset the economic order of things. We didn't have any evidence And it was a reasonable assumption. But what we've learned over the past 50 or 60 years, and what I really woke up to when we studied low-level lead poisoning, is that not only are there no safe levels or thresholds, we actually see greater harms in some cases, or steeper increases in risks at the lowest measurable levels. We see that with lead and IQ deficits, lead and coronary heart disease deaths, asbestos and mesothelioma, benzene and leukemia, air pollution and death. So most of the widely disseminated and well-studied toxic chemicals exhibit no safe level or threshold. And in fact, the National Academy of Science in 2009 concluded that unless there is evidence of a threshold, the EPA should not assume that there is a threshold. So that really is one of the most important things, I think, in public health and toxicology today, because we're exposed to so many different chemicals.
Dr. Lanphier, I'm wondering how dentists react to your research.
I don't know for the most part. I certainly have heard a lot about vocal minority. I've also had dentists who've asked me to come talk because they're concerned about fluoride. So there are some on both sides. I don't know if there's been a survey of dentists to see where the vast majority of them would fall, if asked. But I believe that most of them have been taught that fluoride is beneficial.
You've been listening to Dr. Bruce Lanphier. He's professor of health sciences at Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, British Columbia, and will be our featured guest on next week's episode.
Dr. Lanphier has studied the impact of lead exposure on human health for more than 25 years. He's discovered that even very low levels of toxins, like lead, can impact brain development, leading to lowered intelligence and learning and behavioral problems.
Several years ago, Dr. Lanphier's research made headlines when he published a study about fluoride exposure during pregnancy and lower IQ of the exposed children. Several weeks ago, a meta-analysis in JAMA Pediatrics reinforced his observation that there is a relationship between early fluoride exposure and reduced IQ. Dr. Lanphier will discuss that research next week. You just heard him describe the many sources of fluoride exposure in modern society, including oral medications, inhaled anesthesia, and PFAS chemicals that are ubiquitous in our environment.
Today's episode of the People's Pharmacy featured Dr. Gary Slade, the John W. Stam Distinguished Professor of Dentistry at the UNC Adams School of Dentistry in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This was the first of a two-part series on the pros and cons of water fluoridation.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
This show is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, with the People's Pharmacy.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by CocoVia Dietary Supplements. CocoVia Cardio Health is offered in both convenient capsule and powder formats, with each serving containing 500 milligrams of cocoflavanols to support heart health. More information at cocovia.com.
Today's show is number 1417. You can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com. That's where you can share your comments about today's interview. You can also reach us through email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
Our interviews are available through your favorite podcast provider. You'll find the podcast on our website on Monday morning.
At peoplespharmacy.com, you can sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about important health stories. When you subscribe, you also have regular access to information about our weekly podcast, so you can find out ahead of time what topics we'll be covering. Next week, you'll get a different perspective on water fluoridation from Dr. Bruce Lanphier. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please do join us again next week